Everyone, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I'm Christiana Ellis,
And I'm Mike Mateen.
and tonight we're here to talk about Survivor Island of the Idols episode finale, the end
Yes,
of Survivor season 39. It feels like it was only 2 days ago that we talked about the penultimate episode.
it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah. But so here we are. It's the end of an awkward season where I feel like they did their best to bring it in for a landing and they did better than they might have, which is not the same as perfect.
Yeah, I mean that's what I felt like based on everything that happened this season that I was satisfied with this episode and the reunion.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like they did land it. Yeah, I mean for where I mean it was going to be a rocky landing no matter what
Yeah.
but it they got there.
Hmm.
Um, I think a number of things contributed to that. I think Probst really I think he handled the apology to Kelly really well.
Hmm.
Which even though that's left a little unfinished since they still are very vague about what finally made them make their decision, but to admit they were wrong, I think was a big step since we got
Right.
to here. You
Yeah.
know,
Hmm.
um, it would have been nice if we didn't have to get to this, but it's again where they were. That was the appropriate way to handle it.
Hmm.
Um, I was absolutely thrilled with Dean down the stretch.
Yeah.
He was just so much fun to watch. Um,
Man, I honestly was at a point where like I was really torn in that final tribal council. Not only in my own feelings about it, but how I thought the jury was going to go.
yeah,
Uh,
I agree, and I think his one big misstep was he if anybody was wavering, the way he mishandled the question about the moral parameters he had set coming in,
hmm.
I think that swayed them because when he he didn't have a
Yeah.
good answer, and then he kind of made up an answer, and then he got caught that it wasn't true, and it took some of the smoothness out of him.
Hmm.
And he handled it really well. I mean, he just laughed. He's like, "Oh," but
Yeah.
it just it made Tommy kind of just if they were on equal footing, he got a peg down and Tommy got a peg up there, and anybody who was on the fence, I think that swayed him.
Yeah. There was an interview with Tommy where he speculated that there was a bit more of the whole exchange where Dean was talking about all the jewelry and Tommy was saying essentially like, yeah, you got a souvenir because you weren't playing hard the whole time. You just got toys instead of making moves.
Yeah.
And
Well, yeah, and I
yeah.
would say that too. I think Tommy made a very good argument. Dean had some great moments in that tribal council, like when he did pull out the idol and say, "And I didn't even have to use this one." And Tommy's like, "I didn't have to use any ever."
Mhm.
And I thought that was an appropriate response to that. I thought he handled that really well, and he shifted his pitch to kind of combat what Dean was to Dean's. He did a very good job of contrasting the two of them, which
Mhm.
is what you have to do, and it made him look really good. And not that I mean, he was a deserving winner. I have no issue with him winning. I think he made the case accurately and correctly, and that it was the right case to make based on the scenario they were in.
Yeah, it's interesting because in some ways Tommy's gameplay was good, but it was kind of surprisingly low key and under the radar. It was somewhat devoid of the kinds of big drama that we sometimes tend to expect from what we call a good game of Survivor,
Right.
right? Like, even when he betrayed people, it tended to go over relatively well. Like, he didn't have anyone shouting at him. There were people who were maybe disappointed, but that's kind of it. Like,
Well, yeah, I mean, like think about it. Like he betrayed his best ally by teaching her the incorrect way to make fire, and she still voted for him. You know,
She was still more mad at Nora than him.
right. Yeah. And I mean, that, to your point, it wasn't like this blindside betrayal, but it was definitely a betrayal to go teach Dean how to do it right and teach her wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a strong move and a true betrayal.
Right.
You know, and then he followed it up by teaching Nora the wrong argument for tribal council. Yeah. Which was easier to do, but
yeah,
you know.
yeah. And so, like, let's briefly talk about Nora before we kind of go back and recap kind of the highlights of the overall episodes. There was a moment before the final tribal council when Nora's description of her own gameplay was edited into a nice 15-second soundbite by the producers. And there was a moment where I felt like I kind of like the case she's making for herself right now, that she played the game not like anybody else. She played it by being herself and being open and honest with her and doing it her way. And there was a moment where I was thinking, you know, I kind of like that. I wouldn't ever think she was going to win, but I was starting to feel like maybe she might get a vote or two. And then it was like 2 minutes later in the episode where I was like, what was I thinking? Nobody can stand to listen to her for more than 30 seconds at a time.
Yeah.
So, you know, when it's all edited down by the producers and it's made coherent, that's one thing. But that's not how she actually talks.
Gosh, and speaking of edits, just while we're on Nora, they tipped this her winning the last one so early by just the things that they included, the conversations about everybody courting her, and like the way that they like heavily leaned into that narrative well before she had ever won. Like, I just knew it was coming. Like it just. I was like, all right, yeah, well, she wins. She's going to win. Like, there's no way they would heavily edit this exact story for everybody. Because obviously they're, like, doing that with everyone. Like, no one's just courting Nora, but they put undue amount of screen time on those things.
Yeah.
And, I mean, they were funny. Like, her thinking that her and Dean went on a date, you know, and that
well, and actually getting a little bit like, oh, gosh, you know.
Yeah, maybe I'll take him. Like, he's my boyfriend. Yeah.
For me, I accidentally spoiled myself that Tommy was in the final three as I started watching the episode, because I was watching it somewhat delayed. And when I went to go start the episode, it was in the middle of the final tribal council, and I only saw it for a split second, but I knew I saw Tommy. So I was like, oh, well, that's one thing. One thing I know is that Tommy's in the final. But that was all I had spoiled, thankfully. But yeah, so I thought that, you know, I think the summaries that everyone kind of came up with seem pretty apt to me, which is to say, no one can deny that Dean played a hell of a game in what, you know, the fourth quarter surge, as a couple people said, right? But that he couldn't make the claim that he did all that much before that. And right. It's one thing to say you don't need to do that much because your social game is so good, except that everyone was kind of saying what it wasn't really, though. You know, whereas Tommy, we can point to all these cool things that Tommy did and the connections he made with everybody. And yeah, and I think it would be possible maybe to make the case that Dean was trying to make against Tommy there. People have tried it in the past, this idea of like, you know, well, he promised everybody everything, you know, so like he connected with everybody, but yeah, it was always just about telling everybody what they wanted to hear, except that it sounds like that's kind of actually not true. He really did actually have a connection with everybody, and Dean didn't.
Right.
So, you know, it's one thing for Dean to say, if I'm not interested in working with you, I didn't talk to you. But how's that going to make that person want to vote for him?
Right.
It wouldn't make me want to vote for him.
Right. When you look at the totality of it, I think a lot of the people that voted for Dean got caught up. I got caught up in it too. He just
Hmm.
came on with such flair
Yeah.
in these last couple of episodes, and this one in particular. He was just a joy to watch,
Hmm.
and it made me really rooting for him. But then when you get in and Tommy outlines his argument about, and everybody starts talking about this being just a fourth quarter surge, like, you know what, that is accurate. And I can see why Aaron, voted for him, because he was kind of caught up in that excitement, and he kind of liked the good natured, like, smack talking that Dean was doing. Like when Tommy made this whole case, and Dean just looks at him and goes, "Cool, let me show you something," and just pulls out a gun. Like, it's just like, it's such a great moment, just the whole, like, just the smoothness that
Yeah.
he did it, but then Tommy handled it so well, and it was a really fun tribal council.
Hmm. I wonder, though, if there wasn't a tiny aspect of that that may have even hurt him a little bit with the jury. Because the thing is, the Dean we saw in that final tribal council was not the Dean we saw play the rest of the game. I think for a lot of the jury, they might have been feeling like, who is this car salesman, Dean? This is not how you talked to us before. And it makes us feel like, who are you really? I think that maybe was kind of the heart of what Kelly was saying, is that I don't feel like I understand who you are as a person.
Yeah, that's fair to what she was, exactly how she was feeling. So, I still liked it though. I mean,
Oh yeah,
I
I didn't dislike it. I'm just thinking that if the jury was in a mindset where they were valuing genuine connections made with people, that he didn't do so much.
yeah, and he came on, he came on with a lot of, like I said, flair. I think is kind of the word I'm
Hmm.
using. I mean, he had a lot of that. He handled it really. I thought he handled it really smoothly. I think someone who didn't play it as well as Tommy might have gotten rattled by that and kind of played into that, and it would have made Dean look better because he could have kind of shook that person. But whether it's because Tommy deals with fourth graders all the time or whatever, like, he's an unflappable. Like, he stuck to his, and he didn't exactly stick to the narrative he came in, like, but he was
Hmm.
able to do subtle adjustments based on what Dean would say and what the questions he was getting asked, where he was still true to his main point,
Hmm.
but he was able to kind of navigate what was going on so smoothly. I mean, I was very impressed with him in that final. Not that I wasn't impressed with him all season, but this final tribal council, the way that he held together was just really, really good.
Right.
You know? And like I said, in that time when Dean kind of got caught, and he got all flustered, and Tommy was just smooth the whole time. And if, like I said, if anybody was wavering, I think that would have kind of pushed him over the edge. So
Hmm. Hmm. Well, and like we talked in the last couple of episodes, how like jury management was something that you know Dean had to be nudged into a little bit, but he certainly started doing it at that point. But it might have just, compared to Tommy, it was too little too late.
yeah,
It might have been fine compared to some other player, but for Tommy, he'd been doing it all along. And not just because it was jury management, but because he actually made connections with them as human beings.
yeah. Right. His jury management was just being a good person
Mm-hmm.
the whole time.
Yeah, and being very transparent about the idea that these connections are real, but hey, we are all grown-ups here who signed up to play a game where we know this stuff happens and is not just happens, but it is part of it. It's expected. The game
Yeah.
is designed to force it to happen, right? And
Yes.
so, uh, I think the line that really kind of connected me, because I felt like I was going into that final tribal leaning more towards Dean. But the line that really kind of started nudging me back over to Tommy was when Tommy was kind of saying, let's talk about what we want to see as representative. Like, what does the winner of this season represent? Do we want that to be the person who has been playing hard the whole time through, making connections with everybody, strong social game, and doing some of the other stuff? Or someone who is really just doing the idols and stuff?
Yep.
And is like, yeah, there's a good point there. Yeah. And like even Nora though, like I ultimately I was not surprised that she didn't get any votes. I don't think anyone was really surprised, but I didn't hate her being there for the same reasons that I kind of had a moment of questioning, like, could she maybe persuade some people? Ultimately, I think she is an interesting player, and I think it is fair to give her some credit that she wasn't just brought along because she wouldn't get any votes. There's an aspect of that, but it wasn't just that. She did her own thing throughout. She was not just riding people's coattails. She was constantly playing through. Now, maybe people thought that they would have a good chance to win against her, and they were right, but she was actually playing, though. She wasn't just a tag-along.
Oh, yeah. She was just playing in a weird way, which, like you
Yeah.
said, you could almost convince people like that she did that by being true to herself, but it was... Yeah, I mean, she didn't really have a strategy. I mean, she just kind of... But she did play the whole time.
Yeah.
And she earned her way there. She did not get brought to the final three because someone wanted to play next to her. She won her way in, and got to choose who she wanted.
Yeah.
And, and I think it was hard, but I mean, Lauren would have been tough to beat too.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I mean, it was a tough...
Well, yeah, right. I mean, both Janet and Lauren were eliminated because they would be hard to beat. That was the reason.
Yeah.
So,
and they were white, So.
But I think though there's definitely a part of me that identifies with Nora's tendency to want to talk through the logic of all her decisions, even when she clearly hasn't really thought it through before she tries to talk through it. And I think that, the jury just was not going to buy at all that her big strategy she was trying to sell them was essentially, I did whatever I felt like in any given moment.
Right.
And just blew on the wind otherwise.
Yeah, I think the other thing I'll say is we're sort of kind of covering the high-level feelings about it that before we got to go back and cover the highlights is that, it was either last time or the time before, I can't remember, that we were talking about how, there just weren't that many interesting people left. We didn't really know, we kind of were ambivalent about who to root for. And what I realized is that then we had this conversation, what I'm about to say, we had this exact same thing maybe 3 or 4 times ago, after the Dan thing went away, that's I think more of, like, outside of, like, again, how bad that is just as a thing that existed and the people who were harmed by that, but from just a show management standpoint, it took so much oxygen out of the actual interesting things. Because when we got this episode and we were kind of clear of that last thing with Dan, and when they kind of didn't address it again, and we go into it and just kind of try to forget about it and just enjoy and you get 2 full hours of actually getting more to know these people. Like, all of those people that were left, those final 5, were all really interesting. We just never got the runway to get to know enough about them, and it's kind of frustrating. And I feel like that's why we were having that feeling, is that we just didn't know them well enough. And
a lot of our favorites had been voted out, right? And it's at that point you kind of have to choose a new anchor point.
But I would have been happy with any of those people winning, even Nora, because it would have been so ridiculous that it happened. But like, Janet is just, what a great story. Thinking that she was going to be the first woman voted, or first person voted off to make the final 5, and only be voted off because they were afraid she was going to win. And then Lauren was really interesting, and the whole like the dynamic of like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when she was trying to learn the fire and Tommy taught her wrong, and then Nora was over there screwing with her, and like she
Mm-hmm.
was so frustrated, and like you wanted to root for her a little bit, even though I kind of was leaning towards Dean at that point. Like if she had beaten Dean, I wouldn't have been upset.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would have still enjoyed watching her continue to play. Tommy, who it was just kind of like we realized that was his game that he was playing, but once he kind of leaned into it and we saw what the whole picture was, it was like, man, I really kind of I like what he's been doing.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
hadn't really felt
Well,
that yet,
like,
you know?
one of the things that he called out was kind of a revelation for me because it just highlighted sort of an unexamined idea that I had had and that I think a lot of people had had because they talked about it, which is this concept that the person who wins the fire challenge kind of gets this extra boost because it's like they earned their way to the final. And he's kind of like saying, my social game earned me getting to the final without having to do that.
Right.
Isn't that better to not have to risk losing a fire challenge?
Right.
So it shouldn't be seen as less than because I didn't have to make fire.
Right. And by the way, I taught both of the people in the fire making challenge how to make their fire.
Yeah.
I could have beaten
I
either of them.
engineered this whole scenario.
Yeah. So,
And so I was really pleased with that because I realized when he said it that I had been kind of thinking about like it's a boost for whoever does win the fire challenge. They get to have that coming in. It's dramatic, right? And it's fresh in everybody's mind. But that recognition that, but should we feel that way about it? Maybe not so much. I mean, it's better than losing, but the loser doesn't continue on anyway. So,
right. And I think that's where I was saying, like with the way Tommy handled that whole situation, like, yes, it's exactly right. It was part of Dean's whole end play. Like, I mean, it was all of this pomp and circumstance that he was coming in with, and Tommy was able to deflate that a little bit, but in a very legitimate way, you know, and,
yeah.
and it really helped him, you know. So,
Yeah, it's
we'll
it's
talk
just
about some of the stuff from the beginning because there was
oh
some
sure
fun
sure
stuff there, too.
yeah. So we began the episode with Rob and Sandra talking a little bit about what they learned. It was pretty simple, happy talk type of stuff, but certainly given what we know now about next season, the idea of continuing to frame them seems, they're keeping them front and center, and obviously they're a highlight of the season. They would be in there anyway, but it just seems like they're keeping momentum up for that announcement at the end, right?
Yeah.
But so we have them just talking about how they like the game, what they got out of it. Rob talks about, there's more than just money that you can find out here. Like I found my wife, and then Sandra's like, well, I like the money.
Yeah.
I thought that was just a great exchange. It was so on brand for both of them. And then I really liked the surprise of bringing everybody to come live at the fancy shelter there at Island of the Idols now.
Yes. And the added twist was so much fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One note that I want to just ask is that, sure, over the course of the season, we saw shots of them building that fancy shelter, but come on. No way just the two of them built that whole thing.
No way.
No way.
No way.
There's also no reason it would have to be just them. It makes no sense that they would do that. Like, if the whole point is that they get the fancy shelter because they're the idols and they're going to bring everybody over, like, why not have everyone come in with the crew and actual proper tools and everything? So, yeah. So, obviously, they had a lot of luxuries in addition, but the implication that it was just the two of them that built it, no.
Yeah, it was a little silly, but it was part of the narrative. Like,
yeah, I didn't mind.
They're so good at Survivor that this is what their shelter looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's see. So we got confirmation that we were right. We remembered correctly that Tommy was the only one who hadn't already been there. But by the time they're walking up the beach, it seems like he had already been let in on the secret. So the surprise was a little bit neutered anyway. So was so glad that there was something about the buffs because I picked up right away that, like, I don't know that I would have figured that out exactly, but the whole premise of like special limited edition buffs, I'm like, what? That's weird. Something's up with that.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm not going to pretend like I would have figured it all out. I think we were intended to feel that way. It was a little bit awkward on purpose, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Well, they wanted them to investigate them, and only Tommy seemed to be the only one who figured that out.
yeah. Or at the very least, if anyone else even thought about it, he was the one that, that actually got there. Although that same interview I mentioned with Tommy earlier, he mentions, like, so there was the discussion of like, well, he told Dean about the clues not once but twice, right? Like, even when it wasn't the colorblind one anymore, it was he told him in the next one also. And he it turned out that he was the one that found the color one anyway.
Yes, that was hilarious.
But at what he said though is that he really doesn't regret that, even though Dean ended up finding the thing, because at that point he was still focused on making sure that doing anything and everything that could be done to make sure that Janet was going to go.
Right.
And so he was basically saying, like, we're going to make sure she doesn't find it. That's more important than me finding it.
Yeah.
And I buy that logic. Because his whole game was based on the idea of not needing to be in that situation. And so, if he can just keep it out of Janet's hands, even though she has another idol already, but like, at the, he's just playing the odds.
Yeah, because ultimately, like, I mean, it didn't end up hurting him. Like, Dean carrying on because Dean found it, even if Dean had to use it because he didn't win immunity, it wouldn't have mattered. He has to feel confident that he can beat Dean if somehow Dean betrays him on this and does do exactly what Dean did. The odds of him beating Dean are better than the odds of him beating Janet, and so it's okay for Dean to know, even if it's not ideal, if it helps make sure the odds of two of them looking make sure that Janet doesn't find it.
Yep, so, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's all calculated very well, and the only reason that it even seemed like it didn't make sense is because Dean made a big deal out of it. Like, if Dean hadn't made a big deal about it, I don't think anybody would have even thought that it was a bad idea to tell Dean, except that Dean kept saying, "He keeps telling me,"
Yeah,
like,
well, it's interesting because I keep just thinking about Tommy's gameplay over the course of the season. And looking back, we can certainly see that he did a lot of stuff. But I think more than anything, the big ace in the, or the ace in the hole, the big tool in his toolbox, so to speak, was the fact that he had made such a sincere connection with everybody. Everybody kept telling him stuff. That was a recurring theme we saw over the course of the season. Is so many people, when they had a secret, they told Tommy.
Right, and that was again where his back and forth with Dean was so good, because like Dean talks about the idol nullifier, which was cool, and then Tommy follows up with, "But the only reason you know whose idol to nullify is because Janet told me that she had the idol. Like, that's the only reason we knew how to play it, is because I had the information."
Yeah. And you and I talked through how to do that. So, yes, you got it with a coin flip, so good for you. And I was the one that helped you play it correctly.
Yep.
Yeah, so, but it was the whole little scavenger hunt, the whole multiple stage thing to find the idol was great stuff. I loved all of that. I want them to do more of that in the future.
Yes, everything about that was fun. And even the unintended consequence of Dean's sort of approach to it, of just kind of not working that hard, but just kind of thinking through it nonchalantly, and then the fact that the final one is at the swing, so that he can legitimately just continue doing what he's been doing and just be like, well, I'm going to go for a swing.
Yeah.
Which was no different than when he said, like, okay, I'm going to go take a poop and think about it. You know, like.
Oh my God, that moment was just like. Because we had just been set up, of course, from Tommy's confessional about how I'm a little frustrated that Dean doesn't seem to be working as hard at this as I would like. And then he tells him the new clue is like, yeah, well, I'm going to go take a poop.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Which he was actually doing. That's
Yeah.
the funny thing. Was like they just had such different approaches to it. Like,
Yeah.
because Dean obviously, because it clicked with him at some point. I don't know if it was when he was taking his poop, but
Yeah.
he
Well,
eventually figured it out.
His instincts that it was going to be closer to camp proved, like even I don't know if he would have even been able to verbalize that instinct, but it's clearly where he was looking compared to Tommy, who was looking all over the place.
Right.
So clearly that instinct proved correct, which honestly I think does make sense when you think about it, because it's a whole fancy big shelter that's way bigger than usually their shelters ever are. It makes sense that there's going to be all sorts of weird little nooks and crannies around it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's see. We have. I'm just trying to think if we have anything else in this section before the challenge that we want to. We have Dean talking about he finds it and keeping it for himself, and he's saying DK Chillin is now DK Villain. That was kind of charming.
Yeah, it was just he was fun, He was.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the challenge was. It had some interesting elements to it, like that weren't necessarily super dramatic, but just, the iron ring around the pole sort of ladder thing where you had to slide the rungs back and forth to get the ring up it while you climb it. That was kind of a neat little mechanic there.
Sorry, Abby just landed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was kind of neat. And then there was, the rope rungs. And yeah, there's just some neat stuff in there. I mean, ultimately, yeah.
Fun.
Mm-hmm. It's not a super dramatic one, but, again, Dean had really just built up a head of steam at this point, having the nullifier and now the, and he thinks still the legacy idol. And then he has a regular hidden idol, and now he's got the necklace around his neck. Yeah, he has all of the toys.
Yes, and then with the episode title, he's like, "If look at me now, Mama," or whatever he said. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he gets to bring one person to share the steak. Janet lobbies for it, pretty aggressively, just speaks up to suggest that he should take her. He says it's all about strategy and then ultimately takes Nora, and it is yet another example of people kind of indirectly but still pretty unambiguously dissing Nora every time they do stuff like this. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, I have to try to not help any of the people that I think could be a threat against me. So I'm picking Nora. It's just like that kind of thing keeps happening.
Yes.
But yeah, so we get, as they're heading out, Lauren thinks it's jury management, but Nora won't fall for it. Cut to Nora totally falling for it.
Yeah, more than you could ever imagine.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think that Nora totally lost sight of the game. I think that she just found that when he kind of, I was going to say when he turned on the charm, but honestly, the clips that we saw of that date, it didn't seem like there was that much. It seemed like he really didn't have to do anything except just let her keep talking.
Yes.
He even made some sort of passive-aggressive, statements a couple of times where he's just kind of like, Yeah, and you're just still talking. Stuff like that, you know.
Well, because he knew that she wouldn't listen. Like
Yeah.
he knew he could say it, and it would just flow right by her. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
he was. Yeah, like I said, he was so much fun.
Yeah, I loved when he said, Nora and Dean, the godforsaken Romeo and Juliet of Survivor 39. Yeah, so that was all kind of silly, ultimately, not too meaningful, really. But, you know, he gets her to promise to bring him to final two, but like everybody's kind of making that promise to each other at this point because, you know, obviously she doesn't do that. So, but even though she says so, but that, you know, it makes sense. Everybody's on the same page with all of that stuff at this point. You know, it's like you get people to say it, if only so that you can try to hold it against them when they don't do it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost more of the point of like, if someone won't say it, that's what should be the red flag.
Right.
But let's see. So, but everyone wants Janet out. And especially since she has the idol, they don't want to be against her at the end. They have the idol nullifier. It seems like a slam dunk. But it is interesting that we got confirmation that it was a little bit more challenging than we had talked about. You did have to guess who it was going to be and play it when you cast your vote and not when the idol is played.
Yes. Which that was the way it was before, and I was reminded when we saw it.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, it was not as strong as
Yeah.
we had thought, but still, I mean, in this scenario, it was.
It wasn't too hard to guess in this circumstance because he had, you know, direct knowledge that she did have an idol. So,
Right.
well, I guess technically still indirect. He hadn't seen it for himself. But he knew through Tommy. So we got lots of Janet being really excited and optimistic and confident because she thinks she's got it in the bag, which is like, was hard to watch just because we knew she was doomed, right? You know, we were hoping something might happen, but as the episode progressed, it was increasingly unlikely that anything else could happen, right? I mean, they wanted to take her out. They had the capability to do that. There's not really any good reason at that point that anyone would do anything other than that. Because nobody else wants to go with Janet, so yeah.
Well, and it was funny that we had one of the moments that, like, when Dean had been at Rob and Sandra's and had talked about, like, trying to get all the votes on him. Like, not that Janet did that, but she basically said she was okay with that because she knew she was going to use her idol.
Yeah.
And it led to her not having an alternative and not trying to work to get votes to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Just in case, because she felt so confident. And again, the idol nullifier is like such a random thing, but it's that you can't plan for. But it was, to Robin Sanders' point, like, it's never a good idea for the plan to be for you to have all the votes. Like, that's just not what you want. You know, because there's random stuff out there like this. You know?
Honestly, though, like at this point, I don't know what other argument she could have made if she had known.
Oh no, yeah, and I guess I'm not saying that there was this thing she could have done had she not done that. It's more of the.
But had she any indication,
like that's a problematic place to be. If you're just conceding that everyone's voting for you and just planning on your idol saving you.
Yeah,
you know, that's a tough spot because if something happens, you know.
Yeah, it makes me wonder a little bit if I actually like the mechanic of the idol nullifier, just because it is a maybe once a season nullifier of what a normal rule would be, right? And I guess that like twists are part of how it's supposed to play, but it's like, if you don't know that an idol nullifier might happen, you know, you're going to base your gameplay on assuming that your idol is rock solid.
So here's my counter to that, and it goes back to a lot of what Tommy was saying, is that if everything else you're doing is right, then that idle nullifier is not going to like, you'll know, someone will tell you that that exists.
Yeah, yeah.
If other people know about it, and which other people did.
Right. And I think that making it, like, in this circumstance, it was pretty easy to use. But in most other circumstances with more people, it would probably be harder to guess. And,
Yeah,
and
even
it, yeah.
had there been 2 rounds of it, which there weren't, we thought it was going to have to be deciding whether to use it at 6 or 5. But because of the way it got expedited straight to 5, like, she had to use it.
Yeah.
So he knew she had to use it. And so those things don't always exist. Like, so the guessing mechanic of it is a lot more complicated, and the keeping it secret from the person is a little more complicated. There's just things that didn't exist now that made it feel more powerful. And Janet's reaction, because, like, we liked her, and we liked that she was confident about going further. And then her sadness that she got blindsided by something she didn't even know existed makes us feel, well, should that have even existed? But the reality is, like, there's so many other factors to why it went down this way. That's my counter to it.
Well, and it's also, it's the nature of the show. It happens every season that sometimes people just get screwed by the random twists, right?
Try reshuffle.
The numbers go bad for you on a reshuffle, you're just screwed, but it's the nature of the game that you have to try to be able to land on your feet, but sometimes it's just going to twist worse for some people than others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There can only be one sole survivor.
That's right. Unless it is War of the Winners. There will only be one there at the end, I guess, but anyway. So
we'll get to that.
Yeah, so we get there's some discussion, like, Tommy is realizing that
Sorry. While you're talking, I'm going to walk and feed my dog. He's
okay.
in daycare all day, and he looks really hungry.
Aw. All right, so what I was just going to say is Tommy realizes, to his frustration, that there's an element of this vote where he doesn't actually have control, because even though he thinks he's got everybody on the same page to take out Janet, he realizes that Dean could decide to take Lauren out instead, and realizes that there's nothing he could do to stop that, except to just try to persuade Dean that that's not in his interest. But it really ultimately just came down to, who does Dean think is the bigger threat? And they're both threats, right? Now, I think that Dean made the right choice by taking out Janet, not because Janet was necessarily a bigger threat than Lauren, although I think she was, but not necessarily for that reason, because that's hard to gauge. But with Janet, he gets the move of playing an idle nullifier correctly. And because she's great at fire, if you're going to have to make fire against someone, you'd rather make fire against Lauren than Janet. So those are the 2 reasons that it's better for Dean to take out Janet than Lauren in this moment, regardless of who is a bigger threat than the other.
Yeah, and I think that was only left in there just so that there would be some semblance of maybe doubt that Janet was going to be the one. But
well, I think, though, that it was also a rare moment from Tommy where he was a little bit flat-footed, that he realized he didn't have full control over that.
Right.
But in the meantime, Janet goes out. It was kind of, it was written on the wall for everyone. It was written on the 4th wall that they couldn't see. Or that Janet couldn't see anyway. So obviously, that was kind of hard, but it was nice seeing that she got the standing ovation, and of course she gets some of the SIA award money. Brief thoughts on that SIA award money, just in case we don't come back to it. yay for Janet, yay for Elaine, and 15% of a yay for Jamal. Because like it's great that he got some, but it can't help but feel a little weird to say you get 15,000 and then these two people get 100,000 each. You know, and like lots of people got nothing, but it still feels weird that it would be like so dramatically a smaller number.
Yeah, as opposed to like 50.
Yeah.
You know,
So
like half. Yeah.
yeah, so that I think probably played a little bit more awkwardly than probably intended.
Yeah, I mean, there was so many other ways it could have gone down. Like you could have done 25, 75, 125. You could have done, you could have done 2 at 100, 1 at 50. Like it just, but like you said, it's like
And
two people got 100 and
Yeah.
one got 15. Yeah.
I think it's possible that it could have been presented in a different way that would have lessened that feeling, because the truth is that Jamal was voted off much sooner, right? And that although he's cool and we like him and we're glad he got some money, he was out sooner in the game, right? And he wasn't in it as long, and he didn't do some of the things that clearly she was wanting to reward Elaine and Janet for. But having them all just read off back to back like that made it feel less than.
Right. As opposed to, like you were saying, if they had, like a little sentence about, hey, Jamal, like, great making it as far as you did. Sorry you didn't get to go further, but I really liked seeing you. Elaine, you did such a great job making it this far, and you did these great moves, and this is why I'm rewarding you. And then, Janet, because you are this, and because of that, this is why. Like, if there was just some 3 bullet points about each of them that would differentiate why they're like that, it would have made sense too. You're 100% right. So,
Yeah.
oh, you already done, bud?
So, we get the let's see. I guess right after. Oh well, in my notes right now, I had the bit about how the episode was briefly postponed for the impeachment announcement, which is not really Survivor related per se, except I put it in my notes because I had to fast forward through 10 minutes of that. But
I'm just watching it, but yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, if you're watching live, you kind of don't have a choice.
I was
But
like delayed live or whatever, where I had delayed it enough where I could fast forward through the
I
commercials.
might have in that circumstance, but I was trying to watch it last night and I was already up late, so I kind of really didn't want to
That makes sense.
didn't want to delay it any more than I had to. But so we have, we come back with Dean practicing fire and mentioning how he hadn't made it at all so far. He's not doing super well, but this is where we have, some of this early stuff before even the challenge, where Tommy is talking to Nora about like, he's saying, I can't make fire. I'm no good at that. If you want me to beat somebody, I won't. So you should bring me if you can. Like if you win, you should bring me because I won't be able to beat anyone else at fire. And, I probably won't win, or something. So I liked, though, that there's that moment where he's talking in the confessional about, I'm really trying to pitch my best pitch to Nora, but I feel like I don't understand what she wants to hear from me. I'm kind of flailing a little bit. But and she's a little bit savvy too, in the sense that he's trying to say, if Dean promised to take you, he's lying because he also promised to take me. But she immediately points out, it's like, well, yes, but you could be lying right now. So like, it would, you telling me that he's lying just doesn't, I have to decide which of you I trust regardless. So that means nothing to me. But at this point, this is where Nora's, happy to have people wanting to work with her, just even if it's just by process of elimination. So that's where we got the challenge, and it was, balancing the letters on the wobbly platforms, which is interesting because there's got to be like just a real trick to it, because it seems very clear that even though it remains difficult, people at some point, it just kind of starts to click and they start moving forward. And it's still difficult, but you get past that point where you can't even get 2 or 3 blocks to stay.
Yeah, I think the turning point is really when you learn how to lock it in without and go back without wobbling it.
Yeah, like I think part of the issue is you have to learn where to hold it when you balance the blocks so that when you lock it, it doesn't have to move within the lock. Because if it's too far to one side or the other, you put the lock in place, but then you let it go and it's not actually at rest yet. And it shifts just enough to drop everything. And I think that's what was happening to a lot of people. So you had to get to the point where before you try to lock it, you are already holding it at exactly where it needs to stay. And then you engage the lock. And as opposed to trying to engage the lock, but it won't click because it's not in the right position, so you have to move it, and then everything falls because you were balancing based on the wrong position. But yeah, so, good for Nora, right? I mean, at this point, this is when she won, and there was that talk, because this is where she was talking about how, like, she played the game, her own way. This is her 3rd individual win. And this is where I was starting to feel like, maybe she could make a case that she's not just the GOAT. But, I mean, that was momentary. And I have to say that even though Tommy ended up winning, in my notes at this point, I said, if I'm Nora, I think I picked Tommy. And I think that's because, like, we ended the last episode just 2 days ago. Both of us were kind of agreed that, short of Janet, Tommy and Dean and Lauren were kind of our next favorites.
I can still hear you, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I just had to say hello to my wife.
Sure. So.
My dog thought she was an intruder.
Oh, no.
Anyway,
Well, you could still hear me, but you weren't listening to what my point was, because I finished it in where I was kind of.
well, I meant, but not the question portion of it. So.
Yeah, that's fine. So, I mean, ultimately, what I was saying is that in my notes at this point, with Nora winning, I thought she should pick Tommy. Like, for her own game, I thought Tommy was the right choice. But that's because I was still kind of in that position that we were at the end of the last episode of feeling like Lauren and Dean are kind of maybe our second favorites after Janet.
Yeah, I agree. I think because that's the thing is until Tommy, I mean, for as much flair as we talked about Dean having, like Tommy closed out pretty strong too, now that I'm kind of reflecting back on it. Mm-hmm. Because of what we already talked about with the fire making thing, his performance that we've discussed a couple of times at Tribal Council, he really, at this point, he didn't feel as strong of a favorite as he did when we got to Tribal. Mm-hmm. And it made sense, because Dean had so much going for him, and Lauren has always been identified as a top threat.
Yeah.
Yes, in the moment, this was the right call.
Right. And so this next sequence, though, had to be excruciating for the other players. And it was where I was immediately having my notes, what was I thinking? Because the whole bit of like, okay, everybody, I'm going to have you all sitting waiting on my decision, and I'm going to think about it, but I'm going to go swimming for a little bit. So I'll come back and tell you about what I'm thinking. And like the editing at least makes it seem like, yeah, she literally just goes swimming by herself while they're all sitting awkwardly in the shelter. Like, there is literally nothing else we feel like doing right now. This is all we want to hear from her, but we can't, none of us can force her because we don't want to make her mad at us.
Right. and especially since she said she was going to tell them. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not. It would have been a little still awkward if she sort of didn't address it and just was like, "Oh, I'm going to go
Mm-hmm.
swimming and think about
Yeah.
stuff and I'll be back," but not explicitly telling them, "I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you. I'm just not going to do it right now."
Yeah.
They're like, ah, yeah.
Right. So honestly, I think that the actual end result of all her logic is pretty solid based on what she knows, which, as we know, is only, it's got some half truths in it, right? Tommy says he can't make fire even though he can. She has been told that Dean can make fire even though he's not actually very good at it. But based on the information she thinks she has, it's a fairly solid, worked out way. But when she's just trying to explain it, it's just maddening to listen to. I want to talk a little bit about the whole bit with Lauren, because certainly Lauren was really hoping to get picked and was understandably disappointed when she didn't. And it's reasonable, I think, for her to have at least some feelings of, you're saying I'm your number one, but not enough to take me to the end. And like, we can take a step back outside the game and say, of course Lauren knows it's all a game, and she would she do the same in Nora's position? Of course she would. If it was an equivalent swap, right? Like, it's easy for Lauren to say, yes, I would bring Nora.
Right.
Right? It's not equivalent, but like, if their actual situation were reversed. But at the same time, though, it is a completely understandable, normal human reaction for her to be upset and stressed, especially since what she's thinking is, not only am I going to have to make fire, but at least her understanding is that Nora's choice of who else is going to make fire is specifically chosen by who she thinks can beat Lauren at making fire.
Right.
So it's not only not guaranteeing her, but it is then, as a secondary choice, trying to make it even more difficult for her. And then wanting to come on over while she's practicing making fire and saying, we're cool, right?
No, we're not cool. Right.
Yeah, so it's one of those things. It's like, we could certainly say, when she is able to take a breath, Lauren, of course, will understand this is a game where people are making selfish decisions because they want to win. Only one person can win. Like, we get that. That's all. That's real, right? But like, so it's one thing for her, for Lauren to be a little bit unreasonable for understandable reasons. But Nora just handled her side of that argument so badly. When you get to the point of, you're being selfish for making me feel bad for making a decision that's best for me. And it's like,
Yes.
okay, let's keep thinking that one through, Nora. You made a selfish decision, and now she's making you feel bad for being selfish, so you're going to say she's selfish. That is textbook projection. Like, that is exactly what projection is all about, right? She's feeling like, I feel bad that I made my friend mad at me by being selfish, but I don't want to have made a different decision. So I just need to lash out at the person making me feel bad, which I blame her for. And so what do I blame her for? Well, if she was really my friend, she wouldn't make me feel bad. And so Nora handled that really badly. I think she, it was not altogether surprising, but still.
Well, and how funny was it? I don't know if you caught this because it was fairly low key. That Lauren, at the end, thought that Tommy had encouraged her to do that.
Mm-hmm.
She said that in Tribal, like when they were talking about it, and she was like, Well, that's what it was about. Like when it was the revelation that he had taught Dean the right way and taught Lauren the wrong way,
Mm-hmm.
she actually projected that Tommy had made Nora do that to her, but we didn't ever see that, so I don't think
Yeah.
that happened. I think that was just Nora being Nora.
Yeah,
But it's funny that like Tommy got credit in her mind
mm-hmm.
for that.
Well, I think it was a situation. I think there's a little bit of not complete misunderstanding there, because I think there is an element to which Nora did know that was happening, right?
Yeah.
She's the one that told Lauren that, right?
Right.
But I think what it was is Lauren piecing together, based on my understanding of the way Nora acts, which is not always the way I would expect most people to act. But that whole situation felt like there was something predicating it, and maybe what it was is her feeling stress about knowing what was going on with Tommy.
Yeah.
Like,
That's probably true. Yeah.
yeah, because I think, Nora's already in this boat of like, Lauren is my friend. I don't want her to be mad at me. I did feel like for my game, I had to make this decision that has made her mad at me. And now I also know that Tommy is making it even worse, but I don't want to tell her that because that might disrupt the whole reason why I made my decision in the first place.
Right.
I did love, though, and again, it's like it was a big piece of what I think Tommy's great game was towards the end of like the whole business about with Lauren. He's like, well, I guess you could do this. I mean, I'm not really an expert, so like I don't want to tell you wrong. And then over with Dean, he's like, no, you're doing it wrong. No, like this. All right, okay, now do this. It's just like, yeah, okay, that was pretty. That was good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And and it's a fair thing for like if Dean wants to say, yeah, well, I won a fire challenge, and Tommy's going to say, yeah, because I told you how to do it. Yeah. But so we get to the that last tribal, and yeah, Nora's going on and on again some more. I really liked Lauren getting ready to go into that fire making challenge. I liked smiles on both of them, being good sports about it, or at least putting on a brave face. And Lauren,
sports about it. They didn't have anything against each other.
Yeah, and Lauren being willing to stand up for, like, the conflict, the tension comes up a little bit, and she's just going to say, I'm not going to apologize for being combative about this because I'm not going down without a fight. You're making a decision that's good for your game but bad for mine. I'm going to try to talk you out of it. Yeah. And so, and specifically saying Dean is the other choice because supposedly he's really good at making fire. Although I thought it was interesting. I mean, I don't know. Interesting is the wrong word. The fire making challenge was a little mushy, but straightforward in the long run. It wasn't like some of the extreme examples where like neither party can make fire for extended periods, or anything like that. And it wasn't a blowout either. Like Dean kind of built a solid lead and didn't really ever lose it, but her fire was respectable at the end.
Yeah, well, and that's again testament to Tommy, is he taught her well enough that it wasn't obvious that he wasn't teaching her correctly, without actually teaching her how to win.
Yeah.
So she was able to build a respectable fire because Tommy taught her how to build a respectable fire. He didn't tell her how to build a fire that would win. He taught Dean how to do that.
Right. But
and more Tommy, great gameplay. So.
Yeah. But here's the moment that comes in every single season where we say we talk about how both Lauren and Dean talked about having never made fire while they were there on the island, and we're like, why not?
Why would you not have?
There is no one to blame for that but you.
37 days.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
I mean, at least Lauren was saying she had practiced it at home and just not there on the island, which is better, but
guess.
Yeah. I mean, at least it's not nothing. It's still just like, you've been there long enough. You couldn't have done it once. Like, even if someone else really kind of, yeah. I mean, even if someone else really takes it upon themselves to say, I'm the fire making person, and it would feel socially awkward to try to challenge that. Like, I could imagine that, right? But that doesn't stop you from practicing on your own. Like, if you do it early in the season, then it's just kind of like, well, I want to be able to do it too. Like, this is part of a Survivor. I want to know how to make fire.
Yeah, and
Like, it doesn't have to be a big deal.
You, but like, if
Yeah.
you're gone, like, someone's got to step in.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the meantime, let's see. So Lauren loses the fire making challenge, but she's a pretty good sport about it. And again, like with Janet, it's like, if you're going to get voted out towards the end, getting voted out because everyone sees you as a big threat who's going to win, like, it's disappointing for you, but at the same time, like, that's an admirable way to go out. And I liked her in the live show saying, they say not to toot your own horn, but toot toot, I did that. I liked that. That was a nice little moment. So this is, final three, right? And we have everyone kind of talking about their own thing, and we have I think my only real significant note there, other than just kind of summarizing what everyone was saying about themselves, is just the weirdness that, again, is testament to Tommy's game, of Nora saying, hey, Tommy, can you help me with my speech? And he's like, sure, I'm going to help you describe clearly how Dean didn't play a good game.
And it was even the incorrect way to describe how Dean didn't play a good game. I mean,
It's going to be a way that is bad for Dean, but doesn't make you look good.
Right. So.
Yeah. But, at the same time, her talking about, like, I did it the Nora way, it's upside down, it's in your face, it's unreplicable. And it's like, yeah, that's true, but it's also not clear that anyone would want to replicate it. The Nora way apparently tended to just be, be extremely reactive and just kind of follow your emotions in the moment, which, I mean, sometimes we talk about people who are good at improvising and adapting in the moment, and there's an aspect of that that's real strategy, except that, it should be the ability to respond to changes and not just the absence of any other kind of plan. Yeah. So we're at the final tribal portion.
I don't have anything new to say about that.
Yeah, we kind of covered a lot of it. Elaine elaborated pretty clearly for everyone where they stood with Nora, which is to say, you really just didn't have any strategy at all. And although you certainly did make it to the end, and good for you, we're not going to vote for you to win because you really didn't have a strategy. There's nothing you can point to that was a good example of gameplay, except that you just managed to survive, get to the end. I did like Missy defending her a little bit, though, just like saying, but she did remain someone that people felt like they could work with. But let's see. But yeah, so we talked a lot about the Tommy versus Dean back and forth a fair amount already.
Anything more to say about Tribal?
And, Tommy's much better at dealing with the people that he ostensibly betrayed. None of them seem to hold it against him. And there's, you mentioned it earlier, but the ethical lines, right? Nora's was not very specific, but at least clear, of just saying, I wanted to try to never make a decision that I feel like I would regret later. And whether that was successful or not, who can say, but at least it gives some indication of having considered the question before. Tommy has the best answer, obviously, especially compared to Dean just acting like it took him by surprise that was even a question that anyone might ask. Yeah, I think that was the biggest sort of flubbing for Dean there.
Yep.
Yeah, we covered. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't have anything more to say about it.
I did like the moment of Dean pulling out all his jewelry, but also still telling Jamal, "It's like, tell them this is real, right? It is real, right?" Jamal's just like, "Nah, nope." But yeah, so it was a relatively good tribal council. There wasn't anyone who was just really mad or bitter. That was kind of nice. And yeah, so Tommy is saying I'm best representative of what we look for in good gameplay. Nora thanks everybody. She learned a lot. Dean says, think about all these jaw-dropping remote moments that I was responsible for, and but yeah, that's so we ended up with just 2 votes for Dean, and everyone else was Tommy. The 2 votes for Dean were Aaron and who was the other one? I don't have it up. Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Well, you talk a little bit about Reunion Show. I'll look it up.
So, I mean, I think I don't really want to, because I don't want to get into an extended discussion. Like, there's nothing more to say. I think Jeff Probst's apology was good. We talked about Sia's thing. The rest of it was pretty low key. Nothing interesting. I think we should just close out talking about what we think about next season.
Oh, do we want to? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there was a significant portion that was about the whole the Kelly section and sort of addressing Dan, and we don't have to.
I don't really want to get into.
Yeah.
They didn't go any further than.
But
there's nothing new other than they apologized.
Right, but it was nice that they were unambiguous with things, saying like, "You were right. We should have acted sooner, and next time we will. We're taking steps to ensure that." And those are the right things to say.
Yeah, exactly. That was from what we said at the beginning of of our conversation. Like that was that from where they ended up. This was where they needed to be.
Elizabeth was the other vote for Dean.
Right.
And there's nothing else to say about it because we don't know exactly the ins and outs of why. But apparently, both Jack and Elizabeth had just voluntarily decided not to attend the reunion show. So I don't know what that was about, but anyway, yeah. So next season, I have to say, I wouldn't have necessarily known that I wanted an all winners season, but I found myself more excited for it than I usually am. I mean, usually at the end of the season, like I've had a good time, but I'm not necessarily ready right away for the next one. It's nice to have the space, but like this next season, maybe it was just because this season was awkward and like the next season feels like meaty. Like yes, that's what I want.
Yeah, and I would say, we've talked a lot about like returning players. We talked about it this time about how this was a new way to handle like the idea of getting the returning player, the people that we want to see, without actually putting them into the game.
Mm-hmm.
This is a new way to handle that I think is pretty cool.
Yeah,
because there's no, it's all returning players and it's all winners. So the whole idea of so and so has won, we should get them out, goes out the window.
Yes,
and they literally have to play like regular players. Like, yeah, I'm excited.
I am too. Although the one thing that I'll give them a tiny little bit of a sad trombone for is that for them to build up a moment of tension that it's going to be more than $1 million to win, only for it to be $2 million. And it's a little bit like, I mean, yeah, it's more, but I sort of feel like when you sort of made a thing about like it's going to be more, I kind of expected it to be more and more.
Right.
But, I mean, hey, $2 million, that's great. And especially since all of these people have already won $1 million, I mean.
Right. Yeah, it kind of adds to the dynamic of like no one can just be like, I've already won. I'm going to play like whatever. It's there's a prize for for participating that is more than normal. So
Yeah, and well,
I'm good.
I
Yeah.
just felt like soft selling it would have actually had more of an impact as opposed to making it sound like it was going to be huge and then it
That's fair.
only being $2 million, but only $2 million. Anyway, though, yeah, I'm excited for that. That'll be coming in February, so we'll be back
Yep. What do you
for.
say? Try to survive until then.
Well, I don't have to say it now because you took on that heavy burden for me.
All
So,
right.
good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.